So our next speaker is Senator Mike Lee.
Every time I speak to this group, I think this is probably the group with the fewest communists that I will ever interact with. And I'm so grateful for that. Grateful to have my wife, Sharon, with me, my only wife, my best friend, wife of 32 years. Say hello to everybody, Sharon. So I want to tell you about, this has been an interesting year. It's been a fun year, a fascinating year. Hey, Trent. There have been a lot of things that are good that have happened. We're going to go over some of those in a moment. I have, over the last few days, been worried about a lot of things that we have to deal with. Some significant things happened about a week ago in Venezuela. There is turmoil all over the country. We've got all these problems that have erupted. The fraud that we've seen in Minnesota with our welfare system, which I believe is only the tip of the iceberg, and which is probably going on everywhere, perhaps to a more pronounced extreme degree in Minnesota than it has been elsewhere. But, you know, there are a lot of problems. Meanwhile, we've got just a few weeks before we face yet another possibility of a government shutdown, which always creates some weird dynamics. We're trying to figure out how to get that done, how to get the government funded, get the things funded that need funding, and not fund those things that aren't government, never were, and are not within our constitutional authority. These are all pressures. Sometimes it really is worth it to stop and take stock of blessings and of things that we can be grateful for in those exact moments. Sometimes those things will redirect us in the right course. My wife, Sharon, routinely reminds me of that, and that is a blessing beyond blessings to have someone in your life who will do that. So as we round the corner of this year, we're reminded that we have an important anniversary that's at hand. It is known in many circles as America's semi-quincentennial, which is one of the most awful words ever coined in the English language. Semi-quincentennial. This is even worse than the sesquicentennial that we celebrated when I was a child, the sesquicentennial of the founding of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I don't know why they don't call it just the 250th anniversary or the quarter millennial anniversary. Instead, we call it the semi-quincentennial. Regardless, it is good news. It is exceptionally good news that we've made it 250 years. This July 4th will be the 250th anniversary of that moment when some of America's best, some of the greatest sons ever to live in our country, put their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the line. They signed the Declaration, and with it, in the same stroke, their own death warrants. Two of them are reported to have joked about who would have the privilege of dying faster based on relative mass to body size ratios, because so certain were they that they would be ordered executed if this whole experiment didn't work. So has it worked? Emphatically, unapologetically, categorically, yes. The fact that there are problems with it doesn't mean it hasn't worked. It's worked. It worked phenomenally well. And I want to share with you a brief story as a reminder of how it's worked. I always like to look for unconventional means of proving the workability of the American experiment. Enter my niece, Tessa Johnson. Now, Tessa is a special young lady. Throughout her teenage years, Sharon and I used to tell Tessa's mother, Sharon's sister, Laura, we would pay money just to be witness while she was in high school to conversations between Tessa and her mother. Tessa is a caricature wrapped in another caricature, wrapped in a cartoon of a teenage girl. When she was in high school, we loved just brief car rides with Laura and Tessa, which would go something like this. And then she said, I can't believe you did that. And I was like, no way. I'm not going to do that. It was so gross, Mom. I can't do it. My teenage girl accent has weakened over the years. But Tessa is, in addition to sometimes bearing the hallmark characteristics of a teenage girl, She's also a very big-hearted person. She loves life. She has great enthusiasm for life. She's no longer in high school. She's now in college. And just in the last few days, she's made a journey from her home in Southern California to London, where she's studying as part of a BYU study abroad program. Now, Tessa, being enthusiastic for life and being industrious, has scrapped together every penny she possibly can over the last 6 months just so that she can have that experience. She's worked odd jobs. She has gotten a job working at a smoothie stand. I think it's maybe one of the Roxbury stores to make extra money. She has started, I don't know how to describe it other than she's become a puppy broker of sorts. She somehow finds people whose dogs have puppies and then says, I can make you more money with it. You let me house the puppy, and then I will stage them on social media. I'll present them on social media, then I'll do it. So every square penny she's got has been channeled into making sure she can get to this BYU study abroad in London. All right, fast forward to 24 hours ago. She's on the phone with her mom. She's just arrived in London, been there maybe a day. And she's talking to her mom in characteristic Tessa fashion, enthusiastic about every little feature. Mom, this is so amazing. Thank you so much for helping me get here. Thank you for the encouragement. They're cobblestones. Oh, wow. That's the Tower of London. It's a big tower, not as big as I expected, in some ways bigger than what I expected. But, oh my gosh, there's a Louis Vuitton store over there. Jane, wait, Jane. We don't know who Jane is. Jane, there's a man over there. He has no shoes. We have to buy him shoes. Let's buy him shoes right now. I don't know where she's going to get the money. Her mom pointed out to my wife, Sharon, as she's telling her this story, she doesn't have 2 more pennies to rub together after paying for this experience. And yet she's thinking about how to buy this man shoes. This is how the founding generation, the men who signed their death warrants that day, July 4th, 1776, this would be an indication to them, yeah, it worked. 250 years later, and this American girl goes over to London, recognizing that in a world in which for most of human existence, most humans have foraged, fought, scrounged just for scraps of food in order to survive from one day to the next. Much of England and its colonies fell within that zone of humanity as late as 1776. It is not an aberration. It is the norm. It is the default of a human condition that you barely have enough to eat from one day to the next. You're lucky if you own shoes. You're rich if you've got 2 pair. You're extraordinarily wealthy if you can think about buying someone else shoes who doesn't have them. Yes, it worked. That was the signal that victory was at hand. And victory is still our companion today. Now, sure, we've got all kinds of problems. The fact that we're still standing, the fact that we have an economy that works, the fact that we still have something somewhat unique in the world today in terms of upward economic mobility. The wealthy can live great lifestyles in any country. America is still unique in the fact that you can be born into poverty here and do so with the assurance that if you work hard and play by the rules, one day you're going to be able to retire comfortably, if not wealthy. We are unique in that regard, and so it worked. But what do we need to do in order to protect America for the next 250 years after this, to make sure that this becomes just the intro and that this doesn't become the end? We don't want this to be the moment, analogous to when Arthur Fonzarelli, also known as the Fonz or Fonzie on Happy Days, jumped the shark. Remember that moment? I do. I was a big Happy Days fan when I was a little kid. The minute Fonzie jumped the shark, the hill went down. The show went right downhill. It didn't work. We don't want to be the country that jumped the shark at the apex of its prosperity. So how do we get there? Well, in short, we have to double down on what worked and shun, like the plague, that which undermines what worked. And what are we referring to there? Well, we've got to look first and foremost to our twin founding documents. First, the Declaration of Independence, and more about the other document in a moment. That's another thing that we celebrate this year. It's not just our independence, but the document that created it, the document that marked its creation. If you have time sometime today, or if not today, sometime between now and July 4th of this year, read the Declaration. It will only take you a few minutes. And if you're busy and you don't have time to read the whole thing, just read the two opening sections. It can be split up roughly into thirds. I'm self-conscious with historian David Barton here to make sure I don't get anything wrong. So jump in here, David. Throw in the yellow flag if I get something wrong, the red card if I need to be ejected from the game. But here's how I see it breaking down. 3 sections of the Declaration. The first section states a number of immutable universal truths, Lockean ideals that Jefferson sort of crafted and perfected for that very moment, recognizing that we have been born with these inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, a slight modification of the Lockean life, liberty, and property. They both still work. They're both still relevant. One is the outgrowth of the other. The fact that governments exist to secure these rights among men, and that whenever governments become abusive of those same things, it is the right, it is the duty, it is the moral obligation of the people to throw off that system of government and to take on another, one that will be more aptly suited and more faithful in discharging those sacred responsibilities. It also contains the warning: these things are not to be pursued for light or transient reasons. But when a train of abuses has carried on so long that we can't ignore them, when life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness are weakened by government for so long, you can't ignore them. You must not ignore them. You must do more. Then we move to the second stage. Stage 2. Stage 2 is what I call the indictment. It's the indictment against King George III. And we have to remember, it's not just against George III himself that was the culprit. It was the entire system. It was the combination, the combined power of King George III, his ministers, and the Parliament, which collectively ran this government that knew no boundaries. They knew no outer bound limits on their ability to make human beings within their jurisdiction do anything that they wanted. That was part of the problem. There's a lot of discussion in there about the fact that the king had sent forth swarms of officers to regulate us, to oppress us, to eat out our substance by collecting excessive taxes to which we had not agreed, and as to which we had really no say because we had no representation in that parliamentary form of government. And it goes on. The list is fairly long. It's actually quite significant. I'd encourage everybody to read at least those first 2 sections. The third section is the natural culmination point. That third section says, okay, it's all over. We're now our own new country. Let's move on. And so what do we take from that? Well, first of all, this creates the perfect picture of who Americans are, what it is that we want to be. And it was a revolutionary statement at the time about this fact that governments exist not because God himself ordained them and said, this government is holy, I created it, this king is anointed by God, and you must follow this king. But governments exist to serve the people. It was perhaps the most bold and profound statement about human nature and about the inherent dignity of the eternal human soul that we've seen. Now, other statements have been made previous to that point, but they didn't work. They didn't stick. They didn't take off. This one took root. So some of the guideposts that we should look to in clinging to this and making sure that we don't get off course, we should look at some of these concepts that arose in the wake of that declaration. Whenever you come to Washington, please stop by my office and I'll show you around. I always like to show people a few things. I always like to invite people to come in. I show them my monuments to lawmaking that are in my office. I've got this one stack of documents that's 13 feet tall, and another stack of documents next to it that's about this tall, just a few inches. The short stack of documents consists of the laws passed by Congress last year, usually a few thousand pages long. A lot of that is probably excessive, but it's fairly manageable stack of documents. The other stack, 13 feet tall, 100,000 pages in a typical year, consists of the laws put in place not by elected lawmakers, but by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. representing all these alphabet soup agencies, usually with 3 letters at a time, putting out laws, because Congress passes laws that aren't really laws. They're platitudes, and they say, we shall have good law in area X, and we hereby delegate to commission or agency or department Y the power to make, interpret, and enforce laws. Now, my copy of the Constitution, which we'll get to in a minute, doesn't contain that. Anyway, I'll show you that stack of documents, but then I'll take you over to the rotunda in the Capitol. That's the inside portion of the Capitol dome. And I'll show you my very favorite piece of artwork, and there are many favorite pieces of artwork that I have in the Capitol. My very favorite one is of George Washington. It's a Trumbull painting by George Washington. Now, this is not the prettiest painting in the rotunda, but it's my favorite one. It's the only one that makes every hair on the back of my neck stand out. I do have some hair on the back of my neck. That's about it. It's a painting showing George Washington at the end of the Revolutionary War, coming back to the Congress, the same Congress that had appointed him, that had commissioned him to be in charge of the Revolutionary War effort, that had placed him in charge of this army. After he won the war, he was, in that instant, the most respected man, not only in the Western Hemisphere, but in the entire world. He was also the most powerful man, arguably, in the world, because he had just toppled the world's long-standing, greatest, most powerful, most wealthy superpower. He did it. In any other dispensation of time, in any other land, that man would have become a monarch. He and his heirs and devisees would have reigned for centuries, if not millennia, unchallenged. And yet he didn't. In that moment, he said, not on this soil, not on my watch. We're not going to do it that way. And so what Mr. Trumbull communicated in this painting is nothing short of beautiful. It's something we ought to think about a lot during this semi-quincentennial year where we recognize this important milestone. He came back and he said, here's the commission you gave me. I'm handing it back over to you. My job is done. I'm now going back to my farm in Mount Vernon. I'm finished. Good luck to all of us. May God continue to bless the United States of America. And that was it. It's in that spirit that we ought to celebrate the birthday of our country at this very important milestone. So in that important respect, and so many others that we could go into, had we more time to talk about the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence framed who it is that we are, what it is that we do, and it framed popular sovereignty and the inherent dignity of the eternal human soul as having inherent rights. And the relationship with government is a dominant and subservient one, but not in a way that most governments had ever conceived of it. The dominant are the people. The subservient is the government. George Washington recognized that. Our founding fathers understood it. And we're so grateful for all that they've done. You fast forward then, 11 years later, 11 years after the signing of the Declaration. The Declaration created what I call the picture, the painting, the image of who we are, what we stand for as a people. The Constitution provides the frame around that painting, around that picture, and it sets up a structure to make sure that popular sovereignty would be preserved, to make sure that those very fundamental principles penned by Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence would be durable and would be protected. And they did this. I won't bore you. I won't bore you with my traditional speech about the fact that they divided up power along these two axes: the vertical axis with federalism and the horizontal axis with separation of powers. And then they built in all these "thou shalt nots" within government, telling government, "Here are all the things that you may not do. You may not take away someone's life, liberty, or property." We added some of these with amendments. Without due process of law. You may not do this, that, and the other. So these structural protections, accompanied by the subsequently added substantive limitations on government power, bolstered the original vision embodied in the Declaration of Independence about popular sovereignty, about the fact that the people are the sovereigns. We don't have a king. The king isn't, the king, here broadly speaking, is government. The government doesn't have an inherent right to exist other than to serve the people, and its inherent rights stem only from the people. This is one of many reasons why I'm always careful not to use the word rights in connection with government. Governments don't have rights. They have authority. They have power, which is sort of at odds with rights. So where do we go with this year? How is it that we can take steps this year to make sure that our next 250 years continue to be steps forward in the direction of human liberty and prosperity and not away? Well, we have to reacquaint ourselves with what those principles are. And we have to look at what has happened over the last 250 years that has worked well and what hasn't. So we find ourselves in a moment in history in which basically everyone in this room has been raised in an era of progressive thought. And by progressive, I mean big government, socialist-leaning, Marxist-inspired government, where we lose sight of what government is. A lot of the talk in Washington these days and around America centers, as we've all been instructed, if we've been raised in a public school or even in a private school, through our education system, primary and secondary education, higher education, our entertainment media, most of our news media, they've all marinated us for more or less the duration of our entire lives in progressive ideology, an ideology that it may appear to be tame from a distance and rooted in the identification of these inherent dignities that are in the human soul, but that really, upon further examination, are fundamentally at odds with who we are as a people and what has allowed us to succeed. So we have to watch out for what some of these hallmark characteristics are. They kind of rhyme. Anytime you hear people speaking, for example, about the fact that we have to be exceptionally careful never to take away power in government from the experts, you've got a problem. So back to this 100,000-page document that is the Code of Federal Regulations and the annual new installments in that, the Federal Register. Those are all put in place by men and women who are experts, or at least have been designated as such by their government. They are well-educated, perhaps well-intentioned, depending on how you define that term, and they are highly specialized in their fields. But anytime you hear people talking about the need to make sure that the power remains with the experts, whether it's at the Federal Reserve Bank, at the Environmental Protection Agency, or otherwise, you know that they're taking us away from the constitutional structure. Likewise, whenever you hear people talking about equality in the sense of radical egalitarianism, rather than in the sense of making sure that we are all equally subject to a system of just and fair laws, that is a step in the opposite direction. Anytime you hear people speaking in terms of making sure that everyone pays their fair share, they don't really mean fairness in the way that you or I would conceive of. They're talking about taking away someone's money because it's coveted by others, and it would be more fair if other people got access to their money. Doesn't make it any less their money. We could fill entire volumes with what it is that made America succeed. But in a nutshell, what made America succeed was not government. Other than government needs to be there in order to make sure that we don't kill each other, hurt each other, take each other's stuff, and that other people from outside our country don't do the same. The further afield you get from that, the less our constitutional structure and our Declaration of Independence vision can protect who it is that we really are. And as Milton Friedman has been quoted as saying, if you seek after both liberty and equality, you've kind of got to choose one or the other. If you choose to err on the side of aiming for liberty, you'll end up with liberty and equality. If instead you choose to aim principally for equality, you will have neither liberty nor equality. At the end of the day, we must remember who it is that we are as sons and daughters of an almighty God. He wants us to be free. He wants us to live in a land in which we can experience the blessings that people like my niece, Tessa Johnson, so enjoy. The luxury of being able to see a man half a world away in our mother country with no shoes and having the immediate impulse to say, Jane, let's go buy him new shoes. As little money as she had at the time that she said that. Let's all, first and foremost, be grateful and pour out our gratitude to our Creator, Almighty God, even the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Lord Jesus Christ, who set aside this land to be a land of liberty. I am so grateful for the sacrifice of the Founding Fathers, for those who staked their fame, their fortune, their names, their sacred honor, even their very lives, so that we might one day be free. The least we can do is to make sure that we prepare the ground for the next 250 years. It's so much easier for us to do it than them. We don't run the risk of hanging, the virtual certainty of hanging that they took. All we have to do is read, vote, speak our minds, stand up for liberty itself, stand up for the Constitution, and remind our fellow beings about the blessings of American independence and the Declaration of Independence, whose 250th anniversary we celebrate this year. Thank you very much.
I told Mike I needed to ask him a question because I just don't understand what just happened, and I'm really curious. Because while you were standing up here talking, you sent me a text, and the text told me that Elon also likes the SAVE Act. See, it's right here, and you just now sent it to me. Isn't he good? You know.
Multitasking.
Yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
Great.
And
I'm going to talk about the SAVE Act really.
just take a second to talk about the SAVE Act, and Elon loves it.
Yeah, Elon does love the SAVE Act. For any of you wondering what the heck is the SAVE Act, the SAVE Act, which President Trump also loves the SAVE Act. He was speaking to the House Republican Conference at the Kennedy Center, or as he would say, the Trump Kennedy Center the other day. And he said, we've got to have the SAVE Act. You pass the SAVE Act. You got to pass it now. We should maybe call it the Save America Act because that's what it would do. What the SAVE Act does, thank you. I learned how to do Trump imitations a few years ago because as I was telling my family stories about my interactions with him, when I would tell it in my voice, it made no sense. So I had to try to figure out how to tell it in his voice so that it would land. All right, so the SAVE Act requires something incredibly simple, something that all of us probably previously imagined the government already does but doesn't do. Requires you to establish the fact that you're a U.S. citizen before you may register to vote in any U.S. election. Now, by the way, speaking of flashbacks into history, imagine if 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago, we had this conversation with a group of Americans. They'd be like, well, that's weird. Why are we having to talk about that? This is obvious that foreign, non-U.S. citizens would ever be able to vote in any U.S. election. But it's become a real problem. In 1993, Congress passed a law called the National Voter Registration Act, the NVRA, also known as the Motor Voter Law. And what it said is it had an objective. It just said we want to make it easier for people to register to vote. So in any state that participates in this, which like I think 49 of the 50 states do, all you have to do when you sign up for a driver's license is you check a box saying, yes, I'm a U.S. citizen. And yes, you check another box saying I want to register to vote as I apply for my driver's license. Fair enough. Whatever. It wasn't as much of a risk at the time. You fast forward a couple of decades, the Supreme Court of the United States renders a decision in which it comes up with this tortured analysis to reach a conclusion that says no state may ask any questions of anyone participating in this National Voter Registration Act check the box exercise. No state, even if it has reason to believe someone is not a U.S. citizen, may even request proof of citizenship. Now, this is just pure insanity. Fast forward a couple more years, Joe Biden opens the gates of our borders, invites in many millions. Some say it's maybe 10 million, others say 15 million. Nobody knows exactly how many because that was part of the bargain. They let them all in, all at the same time, when state after state, nearly every state now allows someone to apply for and receive a driver's license or a form thereof without being a U.S. citizen. Many of them allow it, even if you're an illegal immigrant. So you merge the Supreme Court's ruling with the National Voter Registration Act with what happened over the last the 4 years of the Biden administration, and you're left with an opportunity for widespread voter fraud. And if you need no further proof of the fact that this is happening, just look at some of the examples that have come out in the last few days alone from Minnesota, where they're almost openly encouraging. In other words, having illegal aliens and other non-citizens vote is not just an occasional oopsie moment. This is a feature. It is not a bug. We've got to get it passed. So, Gail, I'm so glad that you got the text I sent you while I was speaking. That was wonderful. Anyway, thank you very much.